Welcome to True View. We're here to help you make sense of an ever-changing world and to give you hope in the midst of it. And you're joining Jamie and I, and we are so excited to have you be with us today. And our discussion today is going to be violence and movies and the video games, and we're calling it Killing Compassion because that's what we really think it's all about. For those that are watching those violent video games and movies and what it's doing to our youth, but to our culture in general. So I know that Jamie has had some interesting statistics and she's looked at things, and we've been pretty overwhelmed when we've seen how pervasive this issue is in our culture.
I was definitely blown away. I mean, you can look around and recognize that there's violence in a lot of places. Even just, I try to be very vigilant about what my children watch on TV. So we tend to like, things about the ocean and just cool shows. But even if you're helping your kids watch what you think is wholesome television, you still are interrupted with a barrage of trailers,
Yes.
commercial breaks, and things that all of a sudden, in one clip, my son saw a girl who was pregnant, about to be shot. And this was in a commercial trailer on a very wholesome show.
Right. It's a real challenge if you really want to protect the eyes, but also the heart of your child, much less yourself these days, to even be watching those wholesome shows and not be absolutely having that violence and what I would call vileness come into your soul when you're seeing, and those images are just so they're so long lasting. I even remember, Jamie, as a little girl many years ago, but I remember watching a TV show that I can still tell you, and I was probably under 6 or 7, but I can tell you vividly where I was, what the impression, and the fears that it instilled in me watching that. So to have a steady diet, which is what our culture is feeding our youth and our just all of society today, is pretty overwhelming to what it does to our souls.
It is, and after the horrible tragedy at Sandy Hook, there are so many pundits and different people who are saying that this violent video games or violent movies don't have really any impact on us. And you really do hear people fighting that side of it.
I think they all own the video game companies and the movies.
I don't know what it is, but I did find some interesting statistics, and I wanted to share these because the average, and this is from a University of Michigan study, that an average American child will see 200,000 violent acts and 16,000 murders on TV by the time they're 18 years old. Those numbers are enormous.
They're staggering.
Yeah.
They really are. And when you think 200,000, you think about that and you compare it to if there was something you wanted your child to do. They say that you should repeat something, 7 times, and if you do, you'll learn it and know it. So we've got a little bit of an overkill if we're saying 200,000. How could a person watch that and not get wired to think that's what life is about?
Well, again, that's why I love the title of the show, Killing Compassion, because once you begin to see violent acts at this number, what's really happening is you're losing that sensitivity to it. You become desensitized to the nature of the violence. And so over and over, this repeatedness, you really begin to just kill that compassion that I believe God put in us. And there have literally been thousands of studies since the 1950s that asked the question, is there a link between exposure to media violence and violent behavior? And out of those thousands that they researched, only 18 said that there was no.
So we're going to focus on the 18, that minuscule percentage that says it doesn't impact, instead of the literally thousands that say that there is an impact and negative. And, Jamie, as you're saying that, it just makes me think about, I had an opportunity to go to a military base and to see how our soldiers are being trained. And one of the main ways in which they are training them is to be watching video games and to be engaging in that kind of behavior for that very reason. They know that it begins to numb us and to kill that compassion because they know they're going to be sending out these people into the field.
But they're going to an actual battlefield.
Exactly.
They're in war.
Exactly. But my point being is, how can we think that the average American who's not having the other training that they're getting, when they hear that, isn't being focused to kill that compassion and also to be engaging in violence.
Or to just think it's okay.
Exactly.
That type of thing is just, it's no big deal. You know, and a lot of the studies that you look at, some of them are very short-term studies, meaning, you know, they put a child in front of something that's violent, and then they take them in the other room to see, are they acting out more aggressively because of this violence? And what I liked about these studies that the University of Michigan researchers found, they were 15 and 17 years long. They didn't do, this was not a 15-minute put a subject here and take them here. Instead, this 15-year-long study, researchers found that a link between childhood TV violence viewing and aggressive and violent behavior persisted into adulthood. So really what we're saying is, it's not just impacting a child at a young age while they're watching it that they're acting aggressively.
Right.
We're saying that these images, these acts, and things that they are witnessing can carry far into adulthood long after the initial exposure. Kind of like what you just said about the fact that you still have that image
Absolutely.
of something violent you saw as a young child. You can still recall because it was very fearful and scary to you. Those images do stay with us, but they're showing that even if a steady diet up to age 18 is still going to affect the long term for these
Well, and that
kids.
just, again, Jamie, goes back to what God's Word says. Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he won't depart. That certainly was intended to be if you're training them to do that which is good. But if you are also training them to do something that is evil and violent, if they're being trained when they're young with that, of course when they're older, that is going to be their natural propensity is to do those kinds of things.
Absolutely. It does, you know, another thing shared here, the 17-year-long study found that teenage boys who grew up watching more TV each day were more likely to commit acts of violence. So again, it's just, this is repeated over and over and over. They even found that having a TV on in the home was linked to more aggressive behavior in 3-year-olds. And the problem I have, especially being that I am trying to raise, we have 3 children, and we're kind of just in the midst of all this, being that they're still young. And I remember taking my son to a friend's house and just telling the mom, you know, I don't know what kind of video games you play here, but we really don't like games that are violent and that where he's going to be shooting things or killing people in the games. And Julie, I mean, it was like I was an alien. I mean, she really thought I was kind of an over-the-top,
right?
You know, what I call like a helicopter parent.
Exactly.
Well, you know, chill out. And the biggest thing is like, oh, they know it's fake. It's just a game. I mean, this is the kind of lies that I think are out there.
Absolutely. And they've been out there for a long time, Jamie, and having raised 4 children myself, and 3 of them being boys, and when you were talking about boys in particular, I remember I would have those same discussions with the parents of my children's friends, and they would often, in fact, Mortal Kombat was one of them that was, I'm sure tame in today's world for what violence, but I remember my soul just being seared looking at the cover of a lot of these video games or movies that are along that line, and I would hear friends often say, it's no big deal. It's just, kids will be kids, kind of. It's just
They're just
entertainment.
Boys.
It's
They're just boys.
And to say it does have a long-term impact. And I think something else that's important is it can become very, very addictive. And, we've only for the last several years really lived where this has been going on for some time.
Well, absolutely.
But I've got, sons that are in their upper 20s, and I'm hearing from a lot of their parents, and when we're discussing how many, especially of these young men, are literally addicted, and they go into even marriage, and it is absolutely impacting their relationships with their wives because they are so addicted to these games, not all of those being violent, but a lot of them that can be. And you think, how can that not impact the marriage relationship, just the spending of the time on that versus something being productive?
Absolutely. And I know my children this year were begging for an iPod. That's what they wanted for Christmas. And, we decided we were going to go ahead and get it for them. And of course, immediately, because I have 2 boys and a girl, it was like, well, the boys immediately wanted the games. Get me to the games, let me download these games. And we did, we let them. And what I was shocked by, number one, is I really felt I was doing my kids a favor and, trying to be that good parent by going to the settings and taking the settings and moving it to I think it was a Y7. Anything that was youth 7 and under is all that they could view. And I was still blown away at the level of violence that was being allowed into that category.
You never know what the standards are of the person who's making that ruling. Exactly.
And if the games continue to get more and more and more violent, I feel like the spectrum, what's allowed, if this is the worst, what's allowed on that spectrum is, by the time you get to youth 7, is still quite violent. And so, that was one thing that I was a bit disturbed by, even after I had put the parental controls on.
Right.
But Julie, I've got to tell you, there was something far worse. And that's that, as the days went on, my son kept getting these text messages. And I was like, what is going on? Who is texting you? Because it was often. And I go and look at his phone. The games, Julie, were texting him.
I can't even believe that. And
come play. Such and such hero wants to get to the next level.
Well, how compelling that would be, especially when we are in a world where it's all, we were wired to have that, when I say competitive, that warrior spirit that God gave us, like with
especially
David.
With boys.
Absolutely.
Boys were meant to conquer, win.
Exactly.
Grab that next thing.
And you're going, here, this is your way that you go and conquer in today's world.
Get me to the next level.
Sounds like when your cookie jar is calling to you.
Yes, it
but
does.
You're not getting texted all the time and saying, here, come and, take a bite.
I'm telling you, I told my husband that is seriously exactly like that. As if, my favorite food had a mouth and was calling me. That is what it is like for these boys. And for my son, who definitely I can already see, more so even than the other, my oldest, has this love for these games. And then you have, on top of his own desire to play, you have the game literally calling you.
Well, what adults have that kind of self-control, much less thinking that a child is going to have the self-control to just ignore that. That's really asking an awful lot.
Absolutely. And so I went to the settings and I just said, we have to fix this. Maybe it's because we've allowed something here that the texts are coming in. So we went to the settings, and on the settings, we, clicked it over that turned it off. We're going to turn off all communication from this game to this device. You can still play the game.
Right.
But this game is not allowed to contact you. It didn't matter. We turned the settings off.
So really lack of respect for the
They still kept
parents.
coming. And I'm thinking, my children also have a rule that they're not allowed to play them once they go to bed. Well, there's nothing that says when these texts can come. They can be sending a text wooing and inviting my son to come play.
Seducing.
It is.
Yes,
at 11 o'clock at night. Or at 10, and I, as an adult, I wake up when I hear a text or I hear somebody calling. And to know that they were still doing that, even after I had changed the setting, I just thought this is where that addiction, and where not only do we have the violence in the game, but we also have the fact that these games are so addictive in nature.
Absolutely,
so that when you're looking then that the average American child will see 200,000 violent acts, that is absolutely incredible, because that's the average, which means there are many children, and think of those who are becoming addicted to these games where they are killing, or a splatterhouse type of a game.
Absolutely.
Their average, they're on the other side where they're just viewing far more of that, and it's of great concern because we look and see what God says about these things, and He thinks it's corrupt. He calls violence corruption.
How can it be anything else? In fact, really, if we look at it and say in the days of Noah, that is the reason that God sent the flood to destroy, was that man was wicked all the time and evil, and it was the violence that was the very core of the reason that we brought the judgment that ended up coming on the whole world at that time.
Yeah, I remember God
think
saying
of that. How much worse is it today?
Oh yeah, and I can't imagine, because I see the world today and I just think, wow, this is incredible. And yet to read, in the story you just, how God addressed that He said there was violence and evil was on their mind all the time.
Well, when we have a steady diet, 200,000, again, is an average of times that you're watching violent acts. And as I think about that, Jamie, and you brought up Sandy Hook, which of course we are all incredibly grieved about that. But often I would hear people, and you probably did too, who would say, where was God in the midst of this? I want to say God is the one that set down the commands that says, you know, hate what I hate. And he hates that. He hates violence. He hates evil. We're making the choice to go and to pursue after the very thing that he says he hates. So I want to say to those people when they go, where's God? He is the one that is grieved more than anyone to say, you're killing my creation. I created these wonderful people, and you are feeding yourself a diet of it. And we have to say, who's behind it? It's got to be Satan, because he's the one who always wants to come and kill and destroy. And he's the deceiver that says these things don't really have an impact, when in fact we know they clearly do have an impact on you.
Yes, they do. And I think you had mentioned, I remember having this conversation, that there was a Texas Chainsaw movie. It was number one, right?
Yes. And especially concerning was that it was so heavily attended by people 25 and under. And I can't even, like I said, I can't even go and look at the artwork that are on some of these movies, much less think of sitting through and watching them and think again, if that isn't a great example of how we're craving that in our society. And the downside is, you know, the people who are making those movies, if that's what people want, well, we're just going to keep feeding it to them.
Usually when those types of violent films are graded by any of the critics, they usually get pretty low scores.
Very low.
You know,
yes.
I mean, horror flicks.
Like, who's watching these things?
It's a low score as far as that whole world is concerned with
not exactly an art form. Yeah,
it's not an art form, right?
Getting critical reviews.
However, it doesn't necessarily need to be an art form, as we see in this example, for it to generate millions and millions of dollars for the people who are producing them. So what that tells me is we can expect to see a lot more of this type of violence, and increasing so, because like many other things that we can become used to and desensitized to, in order to still get a rush and in order to still be fearful of something, it has to continually get more graphic and more disturbing to really have that awe, that shock and awe.
And we've got the 3D,
effect.
I mean, we've got greater clarity. I mean, I compare TV when I was growing up, which was kind of black and white and the buttons, and, you know, the really cool people had the remote, but, you know, we usually stood up to walk to the TV set. But the clarity, you know, the high def, the everything, you feel like you're right there. And not to mention that a lot of times, again, that in a lot of these violent games and movies, you know, they've got women that are scantily clad, and there's a lot of other
show, girlfriend.
That's exactly right. But it's teaching our men in many ways, these young boys, to associate that pain and that pleasure and putting those two together. And, you know, again, is that something we really want to be happening in our society? So, you know, I guess, Jamie, the real question is, what do we do to counteract this?
Well, I think we need to obviously know what our kids are watching and decide what types of programs are appropriate for their age, for their personality. And I know, Julie, you had some great scriptures even about that God asks us to focus on these things. You know, Philippians, it's in Philippians 4:8. Yes. It says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure. Think about just that word. Whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things. And we have to constantly, I believe as parents, question and ask ourselves, is what my child is watching, playing, or engaging in honoring, you know, these very basic things? It's one of the most important questions you can ask, I think, Jamie. And I think parents have to be asking that. And we can't be looking and saying, why is the child acting out? Why are these things happening? And the poor child doesn't even know. They're being fed. It's like being fed junk food and going, well, of course, that's what you're going to end up having, obesity and other results. How can we think that if we're allowing them to be fed a steady diet, again, of horror, that we're not going to see those things? And yet, we think, what was God's plumb line? Is the good, the true, the pure, the lovely, the honorable, the excellent, the praiseworthy. Think of these things. Meditate. Focus on these
exactly.
things. Because we know that
not
is
a glance.
So critical.
It's a, you know.
And I think number one above all those things is helping your child to know that God is always there. There's an omnipresence to God. Because oftentimes if a child thinks that it's just mom and dad's rule, then when mom and dad aren't there, it's a lot harder for that child to possibly say no or or maybe they think they're getting away with something. And so
Right.
I just have to share, my oldest son, like I had mentioned, he was at another friend's house, and he played a game that I didn't want him to play. And
That
he goes,
does
"But
happen."
Mom," yeah, it does. "But Mom, it's okay because when you killed the person, it didn't show any blood. The whole screen just went red. So it's okay." And I just asked him the question, would you have still felt okay playing that game if Jesus was sitting right next to you? You know what his answer was?
What?
"It's okay, Mom. We don't have to tell him."
Well, I don't think we may have to tell him, but he knows it. And that's where he
Well,
knows
that was a
things in
perfect-
our heart. Exactly.
That's right. And that was like a perfect opportunity for me to just look at his little face and say, "No, honey, he is always there. He knows what you're doing. You can't hide from him. And you can't hide those vile images and the things that you're choosing to focus on. You know, you can't, God
That's
sees
right.
that, and he
He
knows
sees
your
it
heart
all.
there. So I think as a parent, it's instructing them in understanding both God's word, but also his omnipresence, that they are never alone.
So important. And Jamie, I so applaud you as being a vigilant parent and concerned. And there aren't, unfortunately, as many parents out there that may be as diligent. But the reality is, even among those that are diligent, or you can think, just like you said, you can have told them what to do, but you don't know what they're doing. So it is, how do you get it into their heart? And I think that's the key, is giving them a love for God, a love for his word, that understanding that he is with them all the time, which is a very positive thing that they don't have to fear, but it is also a fear of God thing in the most positive way. And I think about, we were talking about being a warrior, and the greatest warrior that I can think of was really King David. And he was the man after God's own heart. And when we look at that and see, the reality is that he made the statement, and it's recorded in Psalm 101, "I will set no vile thing before my eyes." And I've even got that on our television because it's just a reminder.
That is a great how-to.
Yeah, it becomes a self-discipline because we really are not generally disciplined people. And so it is where we've got to give those reminders. I think even what you were saying, it might be where you need to put that, on the TV, on the video games. When you go to
Jesus is watching you.
But it is, we may laugh, but that really is that going to help? It may or may not, but the reality is, as a parent, if you can instill that in your child, and if they take that to heart. I know my kids, they didn't always watch, everything that I said, or I should say they watched some things that I had told them not to. And it was like when they got in their 20s, they were like, telling me the true story of a few things. And I just think, you know what, though? I can at least know I did my part in helping them. And they had that conscience, which was the Holy Spirit that was speaking to them and saying, you are going against that which you know is good. And none of those things are things that they'd look back and go, wow, those were the very things I had to have in my life.
I really missed out on
Exactly.
that horrible image in my head forever.
That's right.
And I have to say, Julie, like most parenting topics, how the parents are living their lives
critical
is so important. And I remember actually meeting one of your sons, and he is just such a godly man. And I was so impressed because children like that just stick out these days, where you just go, wow, how did that happen? So I actually sat him down. I don't know if you know I did this.
I kind of remember
I
that.
sat him down in your kitchen and just said, tell me the secret. How did you turn out like this?
The grace of God, Jamie.
Well, I believe in that fully. It is the grace of God. And at the same time, his answer to me, I just think, speaks volumes of the good that you did do in getting up and having a quiet time, where he said to me, his number one thing that he feels made him who he is today is that when he got up for school in the morning, he would come down and he always saw his mom praying in that other room.
You're going to make me cry, Jamie.
And he knew that you were praying for him. And I think when our kids see that dedication and commitment, that we believe in, we're living what we speak.
Yes, authentic
And
lives.
when they see that, it is contagious. They want that, and they know, my goodness, my mother is praying for me. And knowing that is just is such a good thing.
Jamie, and again, I appreciate what you're saying, and I'm so grateful for all four of my children, and I know which one you're talking about in particular there because he shared that with me, and I'm very grateful. And I think it becomes where we just need to realize, again, it's not so much what we're saying, it's not the teaching, it's not that what's being taught, but what's caught. And they're catching so often what we are doing because of the way we live our lives. So if you are watching, or you and your spouse are watching a lot of violence or not having any controls over what you're feeding in, they're going to think that's acceptable. And I think that brings us to the point where even some of the concern is that when we've got the youth, and as I've got a son who's in his 20s who happens to be one of my other children who really does love video games, and think as he has children, you tend to do that with your children that
Which
you enjoy and you love. Exactly. And so we've got to look and say, what will be the next generation? And that's why God's Word has to be the standard. And for us to be able to say, you know what? Even if you were somebody who was doing that, you can change it for the next generation. It doesn't have to be the same. And one of the scriptures, Jamie, that I really love is where it says, in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 22, flee the evil desires of youth and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace, along with those who call on the Lord out of a pure heart, which really goes with the scripture about, whatever things are pure and lovely and honorable and excellent. And I think that we know that we are so wired to want pleasure, and so it's redefining what pleasure really is, that we look at that and have to say, what are the long-term impact going to be? And really what we found is the most pleasurable thing is pursuing after that peace and that righteousness by studying His Word and being with others who share our same love for the Lord and His Word. It's taking enough of a love for your child that today you may be experiencing from them, Mom, but everybody else is doing it. But there will come a time where they will thank you for it. And I do know, as one of my other children, with literally, holding back tears, said, I remember when all my friends were making fun of me when I was growing up, but I'm so glad and grateful that you held your ground.
And to be able to raise kids where they can grow up and know, I need to close my eyes right now, and be able to do that and be accountable to God is an incredible testament to just what you were able to accomplish. And I so appreciate that in our relationship together, and I look forward to just being able to hear more tips from you on what that is and exactly the how to make that happen for our kids, because I know all of us want to protect our kids and care very much for them.
And I think so much of that, Jamie, is you've got to be willing to be their parent and not always be their friend, and recognize that, there are a lot of times my kids didn't like what I was saying to them, and you've got to, as a parent, understand it's a God-given authority, and I'm not there for my child to like me. I am there as their representative of God on earth, and I've, above anything, got to give accountability before God about how I've raised them. And what I can say is, I feel like I did, by no means a perfect job, but particularly from the time I surrendered my life, where I can say, Lord, I at least instilled them in the truth based on your word. And if they chose to violate it, then that sin is on their head. It's not on me. So it's where I can go to bed and have a lot of peace of saying, you know what, Lord, it's now up to you, and to, at least like you're doing with your children, let them know the Lord is with you at all times.
Absolutely. And if you have any tips, some great things that you've been doing in your own home to keep your kids safe or to protect them from violence in the media, movies, or video games, please join us. Go to our website. It's listed there on the bottom of the screen. Send us a message. Let us know what you're doing, because we'd love to share those tips with other parents as we join hands and do this together.